Introducing our first panel on the Spotlight stage, Don't Get Left Behind, Why Nubility is the AI of Transit Planning. I'll pass it over to our moderator, Josh Schenk, in a bit, but this topic is really interesting to me personally. I think there's a real enabler of unlocking micro and macro transit systems and having these private sector companies supporting our metro systems. Josh is no person who's foreign to this, as previously leading the innovation office of LA Metro and now leading the consulting of infra strategies. It's my pleasure to introduce Josh and the rest of the panel.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Joshua Schenk with Infra Strategies and UCLA. Our firm does a lot of work with transit agencies, trying to get them to move a little bit forward in their work with technology companies. Right now, public transit, for those of you who have not been following it, is in a series of crises where it is facing an uncertain financial future, many challenges with even getting riders back after the pandemic, and really existential questions about what is transit and what will transit continue to be in the future? What does it really mean to run a transit agency? So I work with a lot of agencies that are trying to figure out the answer to that question. And a lot of times it comes down to, well, the answer is you're going to have to figure out how to work with technology companies, with new mobility providers, with others who are doing things besides standard transit service of bus and rail if you want to succeed in the future and capture new market share and be successful. So it's a critical thing that we have to think about, and unfortunately most transit agencies are not set up to have these types of partnerships. They struggle with them. They tend to be rather what most people would characterize as risk averse, but I characterize as they calculate risk very inaccurately. They assess it poorly, and so they don't assess the risk of the status quo very well. And the status quo risk at this moment is very high, because the status quo is unsustainable for transit agencies. So to survive, they have to take as what they see as perceived risk and partner with some of these companies. So today, we're going to explore a little bit more of what it looks like to partner with some of these organizations and what those partnerships can look like, what they can achieve for the greater good and for mobility, and some of the challenges that people face when they try to develop them. So what we're going to do is each panelist is going to do a quick self-introduction along with a couple minutes on their most recent partnership success story that they want to tell us about, and then we'll get into some questions. So it's a great opportunity to hear what each of these folks have been up to as far as partnership, and we're going to start with Chris from Uber, right to my left.
Hi there, Chris Margaronis with Uber Transit. I used to work for LA Metro, spent about 20 years in the transit industry, and have been with the Uber Transit team since 2021. One of the things that Uber does really well is deploy the Uber driver network to transit agencies to be able to use for whatever they need. We basically give them the control to deploy that network of drivers that is already out on the road to use for things like service disruption. Metrolink in Los Angeles has this huge geographic footprint. They don't know when a train will go out of service. Historically, they'd use bus bridges. That bus would take an hour, 2 hours, the riders would be late to get to work, and now they just issue a $50 voucher between San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange, Ventura, LA counties, wherever it is, the riders can just hop on an Uber, get to their final destination and not be late for work. And through that process, Metrolink has saved money, not lost money, and provided a better rider experience. So that's just a little snippet of what we do, but there's no cost. They just pay for whatever they subsidize, and that's what's really powerful, is the driver network's there, and there's no cost to the agency to use it. I'll hand it over to Chad.
Yeah.
All right, hey there, I'm Chad Ballantyne. I'm with Spare software company. We do microtransit and paratransit and really anything that's demand response, anywhere along that the spectrum of demand response types of services. Before Spare, I was at in the transit industry as well for 20 years. This is actually my first time being in the private sector, so I have a lot of experience in the public sector. And so with Spare, we really focus in on partnering, with obviously transit agencies, but also, for-profit private companies Uber, Lyft, Transdev, MV, Silverride, really everyone. We think partnerships are kind of the most important thing that we can be doing right now. And not just on the private sector and the public sector, but really just across the board. Even reaching out to other areas that aren't directly in public transit like Google. Probably our most interesting one right now is we've done a industry-leading Google integration with Google Maps for real-time traffic in our driver app and also in our scheduling algorithm. It's really the only one that's doing that right now, which I know kind of seems like it would be a no-brainer for transit to be planning to run transit considering real-time traffic, but this is actually pretty innovative and has just been pretty groundbreaking last 6 months for us. So that's a great partnership. But again, I think partnerships are really the basis for making sure that we really progress public transit further on.
Chad undersells himself. Spare runs the Metro Micro software system, and the efficiency increases seen since Spare took over that program are dramatic.
Yeah, it has been pretty impressive. Yeah, Metro Micro, you should get out there. It's just right out there. It's 8 zones in this area, and it runs really well. We can maybe talk about that more because I do think it's a good thing to talk about.
Oh, we will. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi folks, I'm Hayden Harvey. I lead the government affairs team across the western US for Lime and based in Seattle. Seattle's one of our largest markets in North America. On a good day, more people will ride Lime in Seattle than will walk into the busiest train station in the city. And so one of the partnerships I've been working for 3 years on building is sort of a 4-way partnership with Seattle Department of Transportation, King County Metro, Sound Transit, and Lime, where we're doing first last mile incentivization. So the agencies, we've through surveys found that about 10% of people are accessing light rail using the bikes and scooters already. And in order to push that further, the agencies have developed this sort of incentivization program where if you park your Lime within a designated parking area at a light rail station, we'll deliver an incentive that is equivalent to a transit ticket. And so one of the coolest pieces about this partnership here in our 3rd year is it is starting to generate net new transit riders. Lime riders who would have otherwise not used transit are now redeeming their tickets for light rail, for the bus. Is something that I'm really excited about. I think really kind of the cut a barrier, but one we overcame.
Yeah, I have to say, we work with transit agencies around the country, and every time you go to a transit agency and you say, tell us about your problems, one of the first things they'll say is, our procurement process is too slow. But unfortunately, taking the time to actually improve a procurement process is not easy. And so a lot of these transit agencies, they don't spend the time, they don't have the time to sit there and figure out how to make things go faster so they can create these partnerships. So Chad, what's your experience and how have you dealt with some of these barriers? And you just went through some procurement process with Metro, so tell us a little bit about both those.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, procurement, as any public transit agency employee knows, it can be a hurdle. I definitely was on their naughty list more than once when I was on the public sector side. I think what we've really learned is when it comes to these procurements, make sure that you are really focused on outcomes rather than being super prescriptive about these kinds of things. I think we find that agencies will paint themselves into a corner, and then when they want to innovate, when they want to iterate on something, they can't. They just don't have the flexibility. They have to go back through a procurement. They have to re-procure something. That's definitely one of the things that we see as a huge barrier. And by having really these outcome-based types of opportunities, it really helps. For with Spare, you can put in a paratransit, but then also you can open a microtransit, or you can start a VA service, or you can do an Uber overflow service. You can kind of add and pull these things in and out, and that's sort of natively built into the system. And so that allows you sort of, if you think through when you procure the system, I want something that can have the option to do all of these things, then you don't have to continuously go back to procurement every time you want to iterate, you want to try something new, you want to pilot something. And then I would say the other barrier, just from a pure technology perspective, is APIs and integrating different systems together. I think that's one of the things that we've struggled with. I think it's getting better. It's getting a lot better. We're really focused on our open APIs, and a lot of our partners are. I mean, we directly, integrate with Uber, with a bunch of other folks, and it's a lot more seamless. It's no longer that, well, we'll get back with you. We need to do an integration. It'll cost you $30,000, and it takes 6 months. We're really getting past that point, and so now we can start integrating all these systems so that you can have one system that's really, really good at this and another system that's really, really good at this. They integrate well, and it works well for the transit agency. So making sure those APIs, as we continue to progress those standards, I think that's really a barrier blocker.
Plus one to that, I think we're finding that on both sides of the fence, teams are getting a lot better at sort of moving further faster when it comes to integration.
That's great to hear. So let's talk a little bit about, I know 3 out of 4 of you are not transit providers, but you work with transit agencies, and we all see the challenges and crisis that transit is facing right now. So if you were thinking about what you could do with a transit agency that would really make a difference, or in Andre, in your case, what you could do with the private sector that really make a difference to bring riders back, to bring the transit back to where it needs to be a critical component of our society, what are the things that you would take on? Where would you start when you're thinking about bringing transit riders back?
I think for us, fixed route ridership is complementary to what we do, and we encourage our customers who are able to use the fixed route whenever they can. Last year, I think we had 10 million trips on Metro, which is fantastic because disability is not black or white, it's a continuum. So people have good days and bad days. There are days they need paratransit, there are days they need fixed route, and that's what we encourage at Access Services because it's best for us, it's best for the region, it's best for everyone. So from my perspective, we want the fixed route to be as usable as possible, and I think for our customers, what we've heard, that includes safety and security. Because our customers on the fixed route would be more vulnerable. And so I think that's one of the main things that we hear from them. And obviously, reliability, et cetera. But for our customers, and we want them to use a fixed route when they can, it's safety and security. So.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've heard a lot about. Safety and security comes up constantly. Even if it's a perception issue more than reality, it's still preventing people from being on transit. So any other thoughts?
No, I mean, it's just, again, when we survey our customers, they want other choices. They want to be able to book a trip the same day or take a trip the same day as opposed to next day. And so, again, safety and security is key.
I think one of the things that I think about constantly is the friction for riders. Do I have to have a different payment method? Do I have to get a paper ticket? Is the train going to be on time? Is Google or Spare or whatever native transit app that an agency has going to provide me a seamless service? And I think the last few years, we've started trending in the right direction, but there's still, I live in Northern California. I take Amtrak into the city when I go to the city. If there was a first mile, last mile service that just delivered me to the Amtrak station from my house, one, I wouldn't drive. Two, I would take Amtrak every time, because the second I get in my car, I'm like, you know what, I might as well just drive. Like, whatever, it's going to be faster, even though I would prefer to use transit. And given our financial realities that we're in, I think, agencies like SEPTA in Philadelphia are talking about these massive, massive service cuts. Like, before you think about cutting service, why not augment your service to provide an on-demand bus stop for riders where you don't need to run the bus late at night, but you can still provide a transit service for those ambulatory riders to be able to go from point A to point B, and they can go bus stop to bus stop. Spare, Uber, all these software companies can get so specific. We can geofence up to like 2 feet on a bus stop. So like, you can get picked up on the left side or the right side. That's how specific we can get. And you can enable these transit agencies to still provide service with a good rider experience.
Let me play transit agency for a minute, and
I thought that
let's
was
say
my
you
role.
propose that to me, and I'm generic transit agency. I would say, well, I can't even afford to run the routes that I'm running. How am I supposed to pay you to supplement my service? How am I going to come up with that money? And also, what am I going to say to my labor union? So what do you say to agencies when they tell you those things?
I'll answer the second question tomorrow, but the first question, I think if you're thinking about cutting service, you have to really, really make some hard choices, and there's no easy way out of it. And we on the private side get to just sit, behind our screens on Zoom or out of the limelight. And as someone who had to clear a hot lane in Santa Clarita for LA Metro and do the public hearing and tell them we were going to toll their new HOV lane, I know what it's like to be in the public eye, and it is tough, and it is not an easy job that transit agencies have. So I recognize that it is very hard to find that balance. But to me, if you are currently considering it and you are still running an inefficient bus service late in the evening, now is the time to consider adjusting your service so that you can realize we're going to take 10 passengers each night. It's going to cost us $45 instead of however much it costs to operate the bus.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, transit's great for high capacity, high density, high volume transportation, right? Obviously, and but as transit agencies, we start looking. I still consider myself we as a transit agency, but we're still looking at all the different tools. So we have the microtransit, we have all of the different things. We've even got scooters. So we're incorporating all of these different elements to it. And I think if we can have a more intuitive and cohesive way to access all of these, to trip plan for all of these, and to pay for all of these, it drives me bananas to have to open more than one app in order to get from one place to another, and then another app to pay. That kind of thing, it keeps people from using the system, and I think that that's a really big thing. And then also, if you can provide all of these transit options to folks, that's the best option for the best time for that particular person, then I think they're going to be more apt to use it. The Metro Micro service, over 90% of the folks are using the app to book trips. But it only, it books fixed route, it books rail, it does everything. It tells you if it's on time, if it's not. In fact, I was trying to book one yesterday and it was just giving me fixed route options, and I was kind of getting annoyed because I wanted to take the actual micro. But I do think that having that, really one clear window pane into how to travel is probably going to be the best way we can get people back to transit, is to have really one-stop shop. Kind of how we always used to have Google or Waze for if you're driving somewhere.
Hayden, you want to weigh in?
I would just say, more of what we're already doing. I would say, more systems need to kind of focus on a carrot instead of ride transit or we're gonna die, right? I think people are using a variety of methods. They're walking, they're biking, they're scooting to get to transit already, and I think focusing on that segment and making sure they ride transit even more is a way to bring people back to transit. Lime has a symbiotic relationship with sort of light rail and underground services in North America because they don't get you everywhere they want to be. So focusing on that customer segment, people who kind of already want to do like the right thing or not get around in their car, focusing on that customer segment and incentivizing their increased utilization of transit is what I would say, like how transit agencies can rebound, if you will.
Yeah, it does seem like if we're counting on people to do what's right, then we're probably not going to. We'll have a long wait. You know, it's like people respond to incentives, and right now the incentives for transit use are often not that great. Let's talk a little bit more about first last mile, though. So. When I was at Metro, we put together a first last mile partnership with Uber. Then we did one with Via. In both cases, they struggled. I mean, honestly, they struggled not because people didn't like them, but because they were financially challenging to sustain. And the return on investment from the transit agency perspective was questionable, right? Like, it was difficult for us to measure, for example, like Hayden was referring to earlier, how many new riders did we bring to transit based on this service, and are we really accomplishing anything for mobility, or are we just subsidizing rides for people who already were going to take that ride, right? So what's your experience with first last mile, and how do you arrange those partnerships in a way, and Hayden already talked about this a little bit, like in a way that ensures that they're going to provide the right incentives and that they're going to accomplish the larger mobility goals that transit agencies and presumably you guys also care about?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy problem to solve. Dallas has a huge microtransit program where they provide an expansive microtransit system with dedicated and non-dedicated vehicles, but they have different incentives and cost structures to drive people to transit. So if you're going to hook into the transit system, your ride's much cheaper than if you were just taking a ride from somewhere in the zone to another spot in the zone. And so they have created these adjusted incentive structures. But what was really cool about how they have these non-dedicated providers like Uber, Lyft, and others, is that they saw in one of their zones a huge amount of ridership. And they were like, wait a second, like we are paying way too much for this. Let's redeploy a fixed route bus to this zone. There was no capital cost investment because it was an on-demand, non-dedicated vehicle zone. So they didn't have any sunk costs there, and they just redeployed a bus route there. And the ridership loved it because now they have really frequent service up and down to the main artery of the central business district. So I think there's not one size that fits all, and you have to make adjustments along the way. But ultimately, I think we were talking about, the friction or barriers with different apps and payment mechanisms. Like you have to centralize things really, really, really well and make it really easy. So how do you track that you're not subsidizing someone's Uber ride to go to a bar, but they're actually getting on the train? So, that ticketing system needs to be integrated so that that rider is going to purchase a transit ticket, and in exchange, they gain access to a TNC trip to the transit station. It's not an easy problem to solve, but we're going to get there.
Yeah, ticketing integration itself. I mean, I don't know if anyone from Rebel is here. I was talking to them last night about it. Oh, there. Yeah. Hi. I mean, there's a whole industry dedicated to trying to help people do that because it's so complicated, and we face that challenge, tremendous challenge in that effort at Metro. So, have you had any success with that, Chad? Yeah.
Well, I think just going back to that point of the first mile, last mile, and looking at all those data points. So now you've got all these data points. You have all of these origin and destination trips. You've got, for all of these different trips. So looking at all the data of everyone who's going to and from these places, including your ADA paratransit riders, and reimagining and considering your network as an entire network, I think that's one of the pitfalls that a lot of the transit agencies fall into is I do microtransit, so I'm planning that. I do rail, I just plan this. And there's really no cohesive look across the board, especially when it comes to the divide between ADA paratransit and fixed route. I mean, we do know that folks can ride both services. Some folks can ride both services. And so really considering the entire ecosystem of all your riders is going to be one of those things that's incredibly important. It's a ton of data, but now we do have AI. And I think leveraging AI for doing some of this data analysis we're now at a point where we can actually get some really good information, get it fast, and get pretty accurate information. And so that's, I think, another area where we should be focusing in on a lot more. And that's what we're working on a little bit with Spare as well.
Yeah, and to follow up, I totally agree. And again, we want our customers to have choices. And so there might be a customer who wants to use transit, but is half a mile away from that bus stop. So to the extent that we can provide services, public transit services specifically to kind of bridge that gap for that customer, it puts them on fixed route, which costs the region zero or very little versus on 88 paratransit. So again, we are completely supportive and encouraging of microtransit and any sort of services that help our customers get and access fixed route transit.
I would say, like, when it comes to Lime's piece and the Bike and Scoot to Transit program, the cost to the agency is nominal when you think about things that transit agencies do, like incentivizing a few transit tickets, a couple thousand transit tickets, a couple thousand Lime rides at $7 an incentive is like pennies compared to the big things that transit agencies do. And so we did the Eng work sort of out of the kindness of our hearts. I sort of like knew it was the right thing to do. And when it comes to really sort of tactical first last mile incentive programs, I think the gain it far exceeds the cost to the agencies.
Well, so I'm pleased to announce, Chad, you win the prize. I was waiting for the first person to say the words AI. I don't know if we're doing the AI drinking game or not, but I feel like it's the magic word, and we should all be cheering. But here's the thing about AI. I mean, that term gets thrown around a lot, and we're not going to debate on this panel what's AI and what's not. But I think the key issue with technology that you bring up, and that I think is worth discussing, is the extent to which technology can sometimes, and this gets back to the issue Chris doesn't want to talk about, can sometimes substitute for people. And this is an issue that most transit agencies that do want to partner with public sector agencies, with private sector companies, are struggling with, right? I'm working with an agency right now that desperately wants to do these partnerships, but has such a strained relationship with its labor union that it's afraid to even talk to you guys, because they know that the union will think, oh, you're just trying to get rid of our jobs, and this is just another method of eliminating jobs. So what's your approach to that? How do you tackle that challenge? Yeah.
I'll go there, and my philosophy. First of all, we're a public entity that contracts with 6 private companies to deliver the service, so we don't directly employ any unionized employees. But my general philosophy is there's a ton of work. There's a ton of work to go around for everybody, and I think that it's not either or. And I think there, again, particularly with paratransit, there's going to be a ton of demand in the future, in the next 10, 20 years, and there's going to be a lot of work for everyone. People who are union drivers, Uber, Lyft, taxis, everyone, anyone we can get all hands on deck. So that's my philosophy, and that's how I go into looking at these partnerships. So.
I think Andre is absolutely right, now that he opened the door. But, I mean, when we think about, the number of public sector employees that are doing a huge amount of service that are, their livelihood is embedded in these agencies continuing to have work, continuing to have ridership, the private sector doesn't exist in their frame of mind. And I think we need to recognize that not every rider wants to get into an Uber or Lyft. Not every rider wants to get on an autonomous vehicle. And importantly, not every paratransit customer, ambulatory or not, should ride that service, right? Like the paratransit accessibility managers of each individual service know their riders really well. A person with a developmental disability who maybe isn't going to get along with, a random stranger driving them around town should be on a dedicated paratransit vehicle with a trained driver who knows what to do in these environments. And that's just not the place for our kinds of services. We're here to help support those edge cases and not be the primary. I think that's the distinction.
Yeah, and I think that, when we talk to transit agencies as we're deploying the system, we see a lot, we have the conversations about AI, and yes, AI is integrated in all pieces of the platform, and I think it'll be integrated across the board everywhere. But it really just helps, like dispatchers have an easier time. Like it'll scan through everything and see, hey, this passenger yesterday in the last 5 days is booked with a wheelchair, but this trip today is not booked with a wheelchair and it's happening in an hour. Do you want to check on this? Is this an okay thing? Like those are the kinds of things that are great to bring up. AI can scan everything. It can look through those kinds of things. Or Miss Smith usually travels at 2 p.m., but this trip is scheduled for 2 a.m. This seems weird. Do you want to check this? That kind of thing. So AI can be used really to help avoid issues, and it can also just help supplement their job. And it can also do the repetitive, boring things like make sure somebody's no-showed within the window. They waited the 5 minutes. They're at the right spot. Like all of the things that are really annoying to dispatchers, they have to kind of do over and over again. So there, we do see that it kind of takes away some of those really boring tasks and lets them actually focus on more high-value tasks and customer service kinds of things. Because again, we always will have work. I mean, in public transit, we're never going to be just bored. So I think that this really helps a lot of folks, including employees, just really feel like they're just contributing more and it's a lot less repetitive and boring.
And happiness on the job, right? I mean, when they don't have, people calling them constantly being like, hey, I missed my trip, I'm stuck at the doctor's office, or I'm at the grocery store, I can't get home. You did this to me, why did you do this? When these tools can help support the public employee who's having to deal with that customer interaction, I think they end up liking their job better because they feel like they're really contributing in a positive way.
Chris, I don't know what you're talking about. That never happens.
But I mean, just to play a little counterpoint to that, I mean, people's experience with technology, it is true that in many cases, technology has made us, not have to do boring stuff. But in other cases, we've all had the experience of technology substituting for people in an inadequate way, right? I mean, if you ever called a call center, for example, or anything like that, I mean, there are lots of experiences, or even using a TVM machine on many transit agencies. So how do we make sure that technology really is bringing an improvement and isn't just being put in to save money, which is how a lot of people will perceive it, right?
Access is 10 years ago, we were very analog. We did everything by phone. You call a human being, and it's great. And you still can do that. So you want to make a reservation, you can talk to a human being. If you want to make a complaint, you can talk to a human being. But we also introduced an app similar to Uber. We were inspired by the Uber app called Where's My Ride, which told people when their trip was going to arrive and also let them rate the trip and report any problems that they had. And then, lo and behold, we had online reservations. We introduced that. And, it's for the private sector, this was easy to do, but I think the issue with the public sector is we don't have 150, 200 brilliant engineers at our beck and call. And so that doesn't mean we shouldn't do these things. And so for us, just introducing, I think, these customer-facing technologies while keeping the ability to talk to a person has really improved customer service. Our customer complaints have been cut in half in 10 years. So I think that combination has really worked for us.
I mean, I think pointing back to the importance of public sector employees is it's really their job to defend their systems, whether it's transit or whatever government entity it is, from, noise in the private sector also. I remember when I worked at LA Metro, one of the things that was sort of banged into my head is you don't want to choose a technology partner to solve a problem that then goes bankrupt, because then you have no one fixing your problem and you created another one. So it is endemic on the public to make the right choices and really investigate that you're, putting your time, effort, and procurement political capital into a technology that's going to solve a problem versus, create a new headache.
Yeah, that's the number one thing that I say. We also work with private companies, and when we work with them, my first instruction to them is always, when you go to talk to transit agencies, don't tell them about your technology, tell them about what problem you're trying to solve for them, because if you come in and say, look at all my great technology, they won't care, right? And we all get caught up in the tech. But Andre's point, I think, is a really salient one, which is that there is no substitute for human interaction, and ultimately transit agencies are dealing with humans, and they need to have that basic level of human interaction. And that brings me to another question, which is really focused on equity. Because when we think about transit agencies and their ultimate purpose in this country, transit ridership is still less than 2% of trips. Most of the folks who are riding transit outside of a place like New York are doing so because they don't have many other good options, and transit is their final option. So given that the core constituency of public transit tends to be low-income people or people with disabilities or people who really need that service in order to have access to opportunity, in order to keep their lives going, what positive role can your companies and obviously Access Services play in helping bring that to light and make that a reality for the people who depend on public transit?
I guess I'll start. I think that making public transit really easy, intuitive, and simple to use is going to be probably the hands down the biggest key. I think we need to be able to make sure that folks can access it and use transit, and that's from the technology perspective, one-stop shop where you've got everything, where you have good information, you can trust the information you're given. And then also, it also allows us to pepper in things that compete with private users, like having an Uber for last mile, first mile, last mile, those kinds of things, so that they're not trying to have to figure these things out on their own. And I think, peppering in good, solid transit, mainline transit, along with all of these other options, and showing the whole breadth of what transit can do, I think is, again, the best way we're going to solve this, and give them really good information. And then and we should be tracking how much usage we're getting from these apps. I think that that's something we should push. I mean, we've had apps and IVRs for 20 years, and they were always told us they were great, and they were always, wonderful app. You're going to love our IVR. And there were a lot of times over the years they were pretty garbagey. But I do think that we need to make sure that we are really holding some of the companies to, allowing folks to, measure how much people are using these apps and measuring how successful they are, and really pushing them to have the customer choose to use them. And that's where we're going to get the success.
I would say, like, on the micromobility side, equity is sort of built into the product. It allows people who otherwise wouldn't have sort of the flexibility to go from a point-to-point destination to do that. And for Lime, from an affordability perspective, but also from like a deployment perspective, it's pretty ingrained into who we are. Through Lime Access, income qualified individuals take millions of rides every year for free or nearly free. We have pricing options that if you're getting the maximum discount, the average ride's cheaper than the bus. So not every ride is the most affordable for like the tourist in a place, but if you count on Lime for your commute and you're using a pass or you're using Lime Access, it is an incredibly affordable and efficient way to save time, but also to get exactly to where you want to go.
During COVID, transit agencies and services alike saw big drop-offs in ridership. But what was interesting is when we looked at low-income communities, the percentage drop-off actually was substantially less than in higher-income areas, which indicated to us that these trips were, like, these people needed to take these trips. It wasn't, I'm going to see my buddy. It was, I have to get to the grocery store. I have to get to the doctor. Like, this isn't an option. And so I think about programs like in Napa, where they don't run late night bus service, but they have a lot of third shift workers. And so if you don't have an ability to get home after your shift ends, you can't take that job. And so what Napa's done is they have a sort of virtual program where those third shift workers can get, if they pay their bus fare, up to, I think it's a $20 Uber trip back to their home. And I think those kinds of enablement programs allow for sort of equitable access to transit.
I mean,
That's
to Chris's
really cool.
point, across our West Coast major markets, like 40% of riders earn under the national median income. And so, I mean, that's last month, not COVID. So I think people who need transportation flock to these systems.
And I think I like that equity is baked into ADA paratransit too. I mean, the whole point of ADA paratransit was equity essentially. But that being said, if you don't do it well, how equitable is it? So, and I think what's great about the way Access is structured as an independent transit entity, which is unique in the United States, is that all we do is ADA paratransit. All we do is focus on that. We actually have customers on our own board who ride the system and tell us day to day how things are going. And, we are just committed to improving that. And I think we have, so.
Good. Well, so I have one more question, and then we're going to go to the audience. So if you have questions that that are brewing in your head, now's the time to formulate them so that you can ask these after this final question for the panel. And I want to come back to where we started, which is this issue of assessing risk, right? Because so many agencies struggle with risk assessment and figuring out how to take the leap into trying to accomplish new things can be very challenging for them. I mean, we were just talking about COVID and the challenges that created. Hayden, you referred to people using Line for their daily commute. People aren't using transit for their daily commute nearly as much as they used to. And that's across the board in almost every city in this country. The 5-day-a-week transit user is almost gone, and that's a lot to recover from. So if there were ever a time to take risks for public transit and think about how they could do something different, it would be, because the number of trips, everyone knows, like the number of trips people are taking has not gone down. The number of total trips, in fact, has increased. It's that they're now at different times of day and they're in different places. So in order to survive, transit is going to have to work with you guys to figure out how to capture those markets. But in order to do that, they have to assess risk properly. They have to see the risk of doing nothing as being problematic. What are some of the strategies that you've used that have been successful to get to that point where transit agencies are willing to take a little bit of what they perceive as risk in order to accomplish some of these larger goals?
Easy question. You're talking about risk in like perhaps quantifiable numbers, but one of the things we deal with constantly is this discussion of safety. And, I mentioned Uber's brand. We're really good for beating up in the press. It's a good brand to punch in the face. But 99.998% of trips on Uber occur without incident, and Uber does 1 million trips per minute globally. So every single minute, 1 million trips, and 99.998% of them occur without incident. And one of the common refrains we get is, it's not safe. And we would never compare it to bus service. We don't compare it to train service. And maybe they're not comparable, but I think when thinking about the challenge at hand and the importance of transit adjusting to the new normal, I just think that there's a real leap of faith that trying this out, seeing what it looks like, there's no cost to trying it. Just see what happens. If it sucks, turn it off. You only paid for what you subsidized.
Go ahead. Yeah, well, so we work with hundreds of transit agencies across the country and globally. And, I would say no two transit agencies are the same. But one thing that everyone is concerned about is risk. That's, as somebody in the transit industry my entire life, I'm always very risk averse about all kinds of projects. But we do see, with especially the Spare platform where you can incrementally do things. I think one of the best things to do is to incrementally try things, pilot things, iterate. I think that it's lower risk. You can do it with some retired vehicles. You can start other types of services. You can do VA services. You can do all kinds of things. There's a lot of funding out there. But one of the biggest things to do is to listen to your consumers and listen to folks who are and are not riding and find out why they're not riding, because that's, I think, they're obviously the ones that we need to be listening to the most. And we get a lot of insight. And I think every region, whether rural, urban, or it's somewhere in between, they're all unique. Whether you've got an Air Force base or you've got a, Amazon fulfillment center, they all have unique challenges, where they've got shift schedules and all those kinds of things. And so there are so many tools out there. It's not just microtransit and, a few other things. There's a ton of opportunities out there to really test things. And so I think that's probably one of the things that is most important, is to go out there, tiptoe into it, give it a shot, talk to employers as well as the customers, and I think just try out what other folks are doing. And I think it's worth trying it, because you can always pull it back. It's hard when you put something out there to pull it back, but as long as you're very clear that this is a pilot and you put metrics and KPIs from the get-go, then I think that really helps.
Companies like Lime love data, and so do transit agencies. But I've found that we don't always talk in terms that each other understands. And so I've found the greatest success in talking about ridership and talking about Lime's data in a way that transit agencies understand. So I use terms like daily boardings, I talk about throughput, and explaining Lime is Washington State's most popular bus line, hits when you talk to Metro. We're doing half of the daily boardings of the 2 line when it connects across Lake Washington hits with Sound Transit. And so tailoring your data back to narrative to speak in terms that transit agencies are used to day in, day out has been one of like sort of the secret sauce for me at least.
I think that's brilliant advice, and I'll end this by just saying that government and the private sector are two different countries with two different cultures. And I think for the private sector, and I think your strategy is, again, the way to go is you have to look at it from their perspective. When you're a public entity, you have all sorts of risks. You have regulatory risk, you have career risk with your board, risk with your customers. You're just surrounded by risk. And that's what makes people risk averse, because they've seen people take risks before and bad things have happened to them. So I think understanding, as Hayden was talking about, where they're coming from is the way to go. So I think a lot of people in the private sector go into it, the public sector, they're lazy, they're incompetent, they're slow. That's not true. We're all dedicated to helping people. It's just that we have to deal with a lot more regulations and rules than you do. So come at it from that perspective, and I think that will help you.
Thank you. Yeah, to be fair, there are lazy, incompetent, and slow people in the public sector and the private sector, so I've seen that happen. All right, so we have questions. I guess I'll bring the mic out to you. Let's start over here.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Evan Bontrager with Industry Group. So some of you just touched on it, on kind of stakeholder engagement, which was what I was going to ask. So I used to run part of a business where we would electrify buses for transit agencies, shuttle operators, things like that. And I think a lot of times, like Joshua was saying, companies can come in and be very prescriptive and say, hey, this is the greatest solution, here you go. And it doesn't always land. And when you're looking at operational changes with new technologies like an electric bus, we would have conversations where we'd say, oh, well, the driver can just park it and plug it in while they're on their break, and you have opportunity charging. They say, well, plugging it in, that's fueling, which is maintenance, and our driver union won't let us do that. So question is, how do you go about getting proper stakeholder engagement where you have the public sector and the private sector speaking the same language, but then also you have the ridership, so it's not just this prescriptive thing that comes in, and if it doesn't work, then it just sours everybody's attitude to the next time there's a new change. They say, well, that didn't really work well. So how do you get the right number of cooks in the kitchen?
I mean, we spend a huge amount of time on business development, but that is just the first step, is winning the contract, right? And the most important step is the delivery. And so if you're in the delivery phase, I mean, you may have been working with one team and now you're working with a completely different team, and you need to re-educate everybody, make sure you're speaking the same language, understand the challenges that you didn't see on the front end. And I think, engaging the public and making it really easy for them to understand what's happening, because the public is also risk averse and doesn't like change. So if you say, oh, your bus route is now something that it wasn't, like whatever it is, they're not going to be happy, even if it might be an improvement.
Yeah, and I think change management's a huge piece of this, especially from the internal agency side of things when you're talking about staff and employees. A lot of times once we start an award of a contract, we really encourage everyone to engage folks, frontline staff as well from the get-go. With these kinds of technology projects, it's really important to get the buy-in. Also, your advisory committee, get board members to get engaged. I mean, if everyone gets involved from the very, very beginning and they feel like they're building it together, you can overcome some of those hurdles of like, this isn't quite the definition of my job, because they're helping see the future and construct the future for everyone, and I think that helps a lot.
Excellent panel, excellent moderation, but in that word soup of a title, you left out autonomy. And I'm wondering whether autonomy is relevant to that topic. And secondly, I would have wanted a union rep on that panel to see what the constraints are.
Any comments on autonomy?
Sure. We are, Access Services is we're interested in autonomy. We received a small grant from the DOT to develop an accessible autonomous vehicle, which we did. We have met with Waymo, and we want to continue conversations with Waymo, because I know that there's a certain segment of our customers who would be interested in autonomous vehicles, and I think that could be, and again, we're just looking for capacity, and we're looking for vehicles that can take our customers where they need to go, and I think Waymo and others are part of that. So we're very interested in autonomy. We've worked on it, and we want to continue doing so.
I mean, Spare is a software company that integrates with everyone. And similarly, Uber sits as this company that is partnering with all of these autonomous vehicle companies, bringing in our own autonomous vehicle resources. I think as it relates to public transit, some transit agencies are really excited about the concept of deploying autonomous vehicles into their transit systems, and others, just roll their eyes and say, look, I'm just trying to run a bus, like leave me alone, please. So David, I think, this is going to be a conversation for a really long time. Tilly Chang, who runs San Francisco County Transit up north, has 800 vehicles out on the streets of San Francisco, and that was not her choice. And I wonder whether we will see this increase and then a regulatory backlash where there's actually less for a period of time where cities may not want that many autonomous vehicles on the street for a while.
Hi, everyone. Callie Sunazal with Revel. As someone who's done a lot of work in transit payments and also in on-demand transit, I've noticed an increasing tension really between these great technologies that rely on apps and a certain level of tech savviness and the riders are intended to serve who sometimes are not as familiar, they're not as comfortable, or merely prefer using other options. They may not have smartphones or be unbanked. So love to hear more about maybe how you're working and engaging with these riders to ensure they're not left behind.
Well, Lime has payment options for people who are unbanked and who don't have smartphones. So there's text to unlock features, there's cash payment option, and we actually see utilization on those services a little bit higher than you'd imagine. But broadly across our lower income customer segment, we still see really strong smartphone usage. And so I think what we've seen is in these communities often that are like left behind by technology, they are still more connected than we previously thought. And so we see a really strong Lime Access utilization with an infinitely higher sort of smartphone usage than like a text to unlock solution. But we've definitely thought about those folks and have options. I think is like really the answer. Is like you have to have an option for everybody.
I would say fare collection systems in general have usually been driven at a transit agency, usually by the fixed route side of the house. It's usually a bus fare collection system that is then pushed to the other modes of transit. And when you're dealing with very complex systems like paratransit and microtransit, and even bike share and scooter share, those are a lot more complex. And so those don't really push very well into those kinds of systems. The systems that we offer, we've got account-based, we can do cash, we can do all different kinds of things. We integrate with a ton of fare collection companies, but what we do see is a lot is it's always generated from sort of that fixed route side where, even swipe in, swipe out, all of those kinds of things that don't really translate very well into paratransit and microtransit.
On the paratransit side, we actually survey our customers about their use of technology. We just did a survey this year, so you can go see it on our website. But it shows most people have smartphones. Most people want technology. They're using our technology, and they want the option to pay using their phone as well. So I think that goes against the myth of people with disabilities and seniors that they don't want to use this technology, because they really do. But to your point, you got to make it easier for them. And so we still accept cash. We still have coupons, but we're also looking to not have to do that in the future because people want that.
I was on a panel last week with the COO of Monterey Salinas Transit, and he was telling the public sector agencies out there they take cash, and he said I'm pretty sure we're paying more money to accept cash than the cash we're actually receiving. Uber, you may not know, actually you can program now, only recently, to allow your driver to accept cash. And on the paratransit side of the house, we also do text features where you can just get a text link when you are ready for your ride, and it has to have like a preset pickup location and drop-off location. But if it's being organized by a transit agency, that rider can say, hey, I need a ride at noon, and then 11:59 comes and they say, hey, do you want to click this link to schedule your ride? They say, no, I'm not ready yet, and then you have a 24-hour window to still take that ride from the same pickup location to the same drop-off location. So I think all of these companies are trying to meet the riders where they are, but a lot of emphasis is paid to the app and the smartphone.
Hi, I wanted to ask about airports, because I feel like one of the biggest gaps in transit affordability is airports to major cities. And I noticed that Uber had a transit pilot going on at LaGuardia, and whether that would be something that was going to be more of a augmenting the existing transport from major airports to cities.
You're talking about the shuttle service with a big
Correct.
vehicle, yeah. We're open to it. I think we find that a lot of private operators of those bus type services either need support or want us engaged on like the ticketing side of the house. So really more software than the operational side of things. But we're open to those discussions. I mean, the big thing is, the fees that TNCs are charged when they go to the airport. LA is a prime example where, that discussion continues to evolve, to say the least.
All right, we have time for one more question, so let's go over here. And
Good morning. Jabbar Wesley. I'm with LISC LA. It's a community development financial institution. I'm a recovering lobbyist, Hayden, so we can trade some stories. But I wanted to ask in regards to transit planning and procurement. So just wanted to get your thoughts on engagement with your efforts on engaging with some of the smaller contractors and teaming and going after these contracts with these agencies.
Well, I mean, as you probably know, the federal government had a DBE program, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise program, which forced us to, we were doing it already, but to work with those smaller companies and work with our prime contractors to make sure they had subs, which are small businesses. So the current administration has rolled a lot of that back, or is proposing to at least. So, but we still, from our perspective, want to work with small businesses and want our prime contractors to work with small businesses.
Yeah, when we see those regulations in the bid materials, we often try and find out a way if, we're going to provide some, they want us to bring on a dedicated vehicle provider, we'll look to the private sector and specifically DBE or SBE providers who do that service.
All
right, well, sorry.
I was just going to say, on the sort of the out-of-warehouse operations side, the vast majority of our logistics providers are small businesses, and many are DBEs as well. So I think there's certainly a place for a diverse workforce in micromobility.
All right, well, thank you so much. Let's give a big hand for the panel. Great job. Really appreciate your being a part of this today, and thanks to the audience for your participation as well. Thank you. See ya.